Hi everyone, Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much for tuning in. I am Shehnaz Haqqani. I just want to share that I just published an amazing book, if I may say so myself, called Feminism, Tradition, and Change in Contemporary Islam, Negotiating Islamic Law and Gender. It is by me. It is about 400 pages of, well, I think it's 400 pages total. Okay, so that includes like notes and the index and everything. Please get it if you're interested in any questions related to change in particular, how religions decide what gets to change with time. So this negotiation, how religious traditions or people negotiate with religious traditions, and with the idea that, especially if you want to better understand academically this notion of picking and choosing, which, fun fact, every single one of us is picking and choosing from religious sources in our practice of religion. And I try to theorize in this book and explain how that happens and why that happens, what this idea of the essentials of a religion, the essence of a religion is. Some people believe, many Muslim scholars, many Muslim thinkers, Muslim leaders, theologians, Muslims themselves believe that you can change an existing practice of Islam or a doctrine or something within Islam if it has a negative impact on society, on people, on communities, or if there's a need to change it. And so then I evaluate what that means in my final chapter. I'm going to give you a rundown of the table of contents, and also I'm doing this because I'm so inspired, because I just did an interview with Shobana Xavier for the New Books in Islamic Studies podcast, and I'll share parts of that video when it comes out. But the table of contents, so what I do in this book is divided into two sections. The first section is the negotiables, right? The idea that there are certain issues within Islam, Islamic law, the Islamic tradition that are open to change. We can change these things. We can change these practices, these beliefs, these ideas. And then there are the non-negotiables. The second section is the non-negotiables. These are issues and topics that we cannot disagree with, quote unquote, Islam on. So the negotiables are child marriage, sexual slavery in Islam, and female inheritance. The idea of inheritance: do daughters get an equal share of inheritance in Islam to their brothers, or do they get half the share, and so on? Child marriage, can we agree with Islamic legal opinions or ideas, historical Islamic legal ideas on slavery and child marriage or not? Can we defy those? Can we disagree with them? That's what I do in the first section. And the second section is in the non-negotiable section, we have the Muslim women's marriage to non-Muslims, their interfaith marriages, and women leading mixed gender prayers, women leading both men and women and non-binary and other folks in prayer. And so I explain what is happening in each of these issues. Every chapter comes with the historical, pre-modern, scholarly opinions on those issues, Quranic interpretations on those topics if relevant. Sometimes they're relevant, but the Quran has nothing to say on women leading mixed gender prayers, for example, or on anybody leading mixed gender prayers. And then also, and then looking at what the legal tradition, meaning Muslim scholars historically, have had to say on those issues. And then looking also at what contemporary, current people in our generation, in our context, have to say on these particular issues. And by people, I mean, I interview Muslims, just regular Muslims. They're not experts on Islamic law or Islam. They're not scholars or teachers of Islam. They're just regular people like me. Well, now I'm a scholar of Islam, but when I was just a regular person, in the sense that I didn't have my PhD yet. But I also look at what Muslim theologians and scholars and celebrity sheikhs and other folks, leaders of Islam, have to say on all of these issues. So this is why it's a lot of pages, because that's a lot of text to look at, a lot of stuff to analyze, a lot of things to raise questions about. And finally, in the conclusion section, in the conclusion chapter, the conclusion is called The Politics of Negotiation and Relevance, because when we talk about what gets to change with time and what doesn't get to change with time, there are several things we'll hear. One of them, to quote someone like Yasir Qadi, for example, he says we can change, Islam can change when there's a need to change it, or as long as the thing that we're changing, there's some disagreement in the Islamic tradition on that topic. So he says, for example, that initially when the printing press was invented, or when coffee became a thing, there was always some somebody who said, nope, we don't have to do things this way. This is allowed, right? Because both of those were considered illegal or Islamically unacceptable. He says also that we can't change stuff like the existing consensus on same-sex relations or on women leading mixed gender prayer because nobody. He also says that we cannot change something like our positions, the historical scholarly positions on same-sex marriage or women's marriage to non-Muslims because there has been no scholar ever in the history of Islam in 1400 years who has disagreed with the majority view that you can't that those things are that people who didn't agree with the majority view, with the majority view being same-sex marriage is prohibited, not allowed in Islam, false. And also the majority view on an interfaith marriage, women's marriage to non-Muslims, is that you cannot do it. And so he claims that because there's never been any, or female-led prayers, he's talking about female-led prayers, that because there's no disagreement on women leading mixed-gender prayers, therefore we cannot change that today. And that's completely false. Completely false, because there was always somebody, and a major figure like Tabari, for example, right? Or Ibn al-Arabi, several other folks that I talk about in the book, who have definitely, very explicitly supported women leading mixed gender prayer. So, and then other people will say things like, we can change something as long as there's a need to change it, or when social norms change, when the context changes. And so then in the section on the non-negotiables, I ask, well, the context, has the context changed on something like marriage and sexuality and sexual relations and social norms with gender? Like, are they the same norms as historically, right? Like even 20, 30 years ago or 100 years ago or 500 years ago? Or have they stayed the same, or have they changed? And so if they've changed, then why aren't we reopening the conversations on something like not same-sex marriage? I think we should open that up too, but which has already been opened. But women leading mixed gender prayers and women marrying non-Muslims. So the non-negotiables, the negotiables of Islamic law, I contend with all of that. I engage with all of that in ways that I just found so much pleasure in doing. And this was so much fun to write. It was very frustrating at times because, as you'll see in the book itself, some of the folks that I interview had very terrible things to say about women who want to lead mixed gender prayers. And it just really interesting things happened. And also it was deeply liberating for me because I found out that, oh my God, if the things that we have settled on, and by we, I mean everybody, like collectively, the collective we have settled on as essential to Islam, and they're not in the Quran, and they're not even in the Hadiths, and they're not something that are objectively Islamic necessarily or essential to Islam. If the patriarchy that exists in our practices of Islam can be considered Islamic and can be considered so inherent to Islam, right, that anti-patriarchy feels un-Islamic or it sounds un-Islamic, then we can do the exact same thing with anti-patriarchy, right? With non-patriarchy, with egalitarianism, with feminism. And so feminism can be and is as Islamic as something like patriarchy, or patriarchal Islam is just as valid as feminist Islam is, right? So if you have questions about how change happens, whether change can happen, why change happens sometimes in some issues but not in other issues, what does Islam say about women, quote unquote, I hate that question. And if you just generally want to understand why we selectively, because you and I are objectively relying on sacred sources selectively. It's not like I'm consistently looking at the Islamic sources when it comes to wanting to figure out what Islam has to say on a given issue. My sources, your sources change. Our definitions of Islam change depending on the context, which makes sense, but also depending on the topic. So when I ask my respondents, what do you think Islam has to say on female inheritance, or on women leading mixed gender prayers, or on child marriage, right? Their sources, Islam says the following, or the Quran says the following, scholars say the following, or my sheikh says the following, right? Or in my experience. So our sources end up changing depending on the topic itself. So I have some really wonderful findings in there, things that I benefited from both spiritually, professionally, personally, but especially spiritually, in the sense that these are some questions that I've been thinking about for over a decade now, nearly 2 decades. I've been trying to figure out where I belong, where I fit in, because I disagree with so much on one side, and I also disagree with so much on the another side, and there's multiple sides. And it was a really excellent journey for me. It was an excellent part of my journey, writing this book and finishing it, and watching it and witnessing it just coming out. November 19th is when it came out in the U.S. So if you have similar questions like that, if you're struggling in any way with religion, and it doesn't matter if you are Muslim or Christian or Jewish or atheist, it doesn't matter what you are, but if you're thinking about religions in a way that affects you, if affects your spiritual views, in a way that you want to just make sense of, if you want to like really better understand, why do we think this way? Why does Christianity not allow women to lead, to be leaders in the church, or why won't it be open to same-sex marriages as legitimate, but it has changed a whole bunch of other things, right? I don't engage Christianity here, but very similar things happen with Islam, with other religions as well. And so I do think that the book is relevant to people regardless of their own religious orientations, their own religious identities. And I would love to hear what you think about it. If you read it, if it resonates with you, write to me. You can buy the book in any bookstore. It's now available everywhere. You can also find it online. I recommend bookshop.org, because that way you get to support your local bookstores. Or you can purchase it from a local bookstore. Or you can buy it on Amazon. If you're an Amazon person, you can also buy it directly from the website, from the publisher's website. But the book is available everywhere. And this is what it looks like. I think it's a gorgeous, gorgeous cover. I made a video of myself when I was unboxing the copies that I received from my press, from the publisher. So again, it is called Feminism, Tradition, and Change in Contemporary Islam, Negotiating Islamic Law and Gender. There was a wonderful book panel on it. So wonderful. It was a wonderful book panel on it at the American Academy of Religion at the AAR this year in 2024. And one of the speakers, Keisha Ali, who's right there, she says it's essential reading. I'm so honored because I love her so much. She said that the book deals so much with religious authority, and so it's the term authority, religious authority, is not in the title. But honestly, I forget how we came to this particular title. I'm fine with the title, but because it is about feminism, feminist issues, right? Issues perceived as feminist and then therefore rejected as Islamic. Tradition. I contend a lot with the idea of the Islamic tradition. What is it? How is it cultivated? How is it reformed? How does it evolve? Who gets to participate in it? How does it change, and so on? And then change, ultimately, right? The change is the most essential, well, not the most essential. All of these terms are the most essential. And then Islamic law. Islamic law is changing. Gendered issues are changing, but we're changing some of them. We're not changing others. Why are we resistant to change in some issues like female-led prayers or female-led mixed gender prayers and women's marriage to non-Muslims, but we're not resisting change in some other areas? Initially, I thought it would be very, very, very much gendered issues. Which the dissertation is titled "The Gendered Non-Negotiable." This is a version of my dissertation. It has been changed a lot dramatically, but because gender is a big deal, right? Like who wants this change does have to do with a person's gender as well, but not just their gender. The gender, how old they are, what their marital status is, their experiences, and most importantly, I think, whether the change that they're aiming for or that they're advocating for would have direct impacts on them, or whether the existing consensus, the scholarly position today, right? The scholarly position, the majority view being that women cannot marry non-Muslims or women cannot lead mixed gender prayer. If that has a direct impact on the person that I'm interviewing, say me, then I'm going to have certain opinions about that issue. Then I have nothing at stake. I don't care if we can marry non-Muslims or not. I don't care if I can have equal inheritance or not. Right? And so I look at the different layers of a person's identity and so politics of identity are very relevant to the conversation. But ultimately, it is about relevance and what we perceive as relevant and necessary to change. And so then the final chapter, the conclusion, is all about the politics of relevance. Like what are we how are we defining community when we say things can change as long as the community decides it can change, or things can change as long as they harm people? What does harm mean, and what does people mean there? So, and then I connect it also to academia, right? Like the fact that very few people are citing, very few men are citing women in their scholarship, even when the women are essential, like very, very relevant to their scholarship. Um, there's, I mean, that the conclusion chapter was so much fun to write, because I'd written that chapter, I'd written as an essay for a class, for a workshop or some part of something bigger, and it never got anywhere. I never published it, I never did anything with it, and I really, really wanted it to be included in something. So I mean, I made significant changes to it and revised it and then put it in this book. And I love the chapter on female-led prayer, for many, many, many different reasons. That's where I do a lot of theorizing. I really try to explain and work with the really what felt like a visceral reaction from so many of my respondents, who were so disturbed and horrified and grossed out by something like women wanting to lead mixed gender prayer. Like, why do you want to lead prayers? What is wrong with you? Or why can't you just be happy with what God gave you? Or, you know, Islam has already given you all the rights you need. You don't need to be leading prayers. Or why are you so selfish? Why do you want to compete with men? All of these things. And I'm not talking about myself. I'm not saying I want to lead prayers, but the reactions were really, really like negative. And as I say in the interview with Shobana Xavier, it was honestly very hard to write. Like, that chapter was so hard to write. I also talk about the interfaith marriage chapter was also somewhat hard to write, because there was a lot of sexism in the non-negotiable section. Basically, there was a lot of sexism that showed up. Somebody so casually said in the interfaith marriage chapter, for example, that the reason women can't marry non-Muslims is that men are supposed to be in charge, and women are so emotional and irrational they can't make right decisions. That wasn't a common view, to be sure. And that women cry all the time. They cry when they're happy, and men can't even cry or won't even cry when they're sad, when they're supposed to cry. And I wanted to be like, yeah, that's really sad. Like, you should look into the impacts that suppressing your emotions has on people. But all of that to say, the book was a joy to write. Oh, and I also want to, I mean, I should probably, I'm not doing thanks here. I'm not, this is not like, oh, hey, I'd like to thank the following people. It's not a speech, but I had an amazing publisher. It's published with One World. And Rida Waqas was just so amazing to work with. She was my editor. She was so much fun to work with. She was just, oh my God. And then I got to also work with John from One World, John was so thorough in his editing, you guys, that he went through even like every single link in my footnote. He clicked them. If a link was dead, he would let me know and say, this link is dead. We need to find another one. And if there were times when I was like, oh my God, I really need that. I have to have that source. Like, this is so, I cannot do away with this quote. He would find the quote somewhere else, or he would find the link somewhere else. I mean, this guy, he did some excellent work. So One World, good job with your editors. But yeah, pick up the book. Ask me any questions you have. Feel free to contact me. You can email me. You can find my email address online. And I'll leave comments here, but it's not just for academics. I published it with One World because I did want it to be priced in a way that would be reasonable. It's $35 US, which may be not affordable for a lot of people, but you can find it in your libraries. If you can't afford this book, I encourage you to please, even if you can, please have your libraries, your local libraries and your institutional libraries, if you have an institution, to get this book, because that would be very, very supportive. That would support me very, very much. Okay. But yeah, let me know what you think of it, and happy to engage anybody who's invested or interested in these topics like I am. And I hope that it answers a lot of questions for you. I hope that it resonates with you in some ways, and I hope that you will find it as meaningful as I did writing it. And I hope that you'll enjoy it. It was a lot of my labor. It took so much of my time. And honestly, I think the biggest thing that I'm proud of, probably the best legacy that I feel like I'm leaving behind. So it means a lot to me, and I'm really, really happy that the book is finally out. So, all right, one more time. Feminism, Tradition, and Change in Contemporary Islam, Negotiating Islamic Law and Gender, by me, This is the back of the book, and these are the blurbs for the book. Okay. Bye.